Our country of focus today is Burkina Faso, where the government has finally listened to the concerns of its citizens. Burkinabe government has asked France to withdraw its troops from the country within a month. Protests against the French military presence have surged in Burkina Faso due to perceptions that France has not done enough to tackle the growing violence in the region. We have more details for you in this package.
Burkina Faso has struggled to defeat rebels which it says comes from its troubled neighbor Mali. Although there are growing connections with Russia, Ouagadougou has said it is severing ties with France to boost its military and face its problems by itself. The Burkinabe government has finally conceded the concerns of its citizens after local protests against the French troops in the country by terminating its former colonizers' military agreement. The French troops have also agreed to leave Burkina Faso, where they have been on a counter-terrorism mission months after leaving Mali. France's popularity among its former colonies is wearing off, and what this means from a political point of view is yet to be fully understood. The French government is believed to be sending these troops to the Republic of Niger, where there is a heavy presence of other European and French troops. France having no presence in Africa is a matter of when, not if, going by many locals. The enduring question, however, remains, what is the implication of these for security in the Sahel and entire sub-Saharan Africa? And who will be bold enough again to say no to France? Are African countries gradually ending an allegedly choking Franco-African arrangement? Maybe not. We all play the waiting game.
Now, joining me to discuss all of this and more, I have Mousbaou, SHITTOU, a journalist who joins us live from the Burkinabe capital, Ouagadougou. I also have Dr. Chris Kwaja, an associate professor of international relations at the Center for Peace and Security Studies in Nigeria. A warm welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us on Secure the Continent.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to start with you, Mousbaou. Did this news come to you as a surprise? Because we saw this same scenario play out in neighboring Mali a few months ago. So what led the government of Burkina Faso to abandon its military alliance with France despite the ongoing threat of Islamist jihadists? And what impact will this have on France's presence in the region?
Thank you so much for this privilege. Thanks for having us. Well, this is not a surprise for us here in Burkina. As we said recently in our last conversation, well, with the situation ongoing, we know probably that we will end with this kind of situation today. And as I said, it's not a surprise. And as consequences, I don't think we have a lot of consequences on this issue because, you know, it has been now 7 years Burkina Faso has been facing this issue of terrorism in the country, and it has been more than 60 years now. Burkina has been dealing with France as a key partner. Then, what is the result today? As you can see today, it's really sad on the field. There is nothing done. We are so sad because here in Burkina, well, it would have been better if France was helpful, but we can see with what happens on the field, nothing at all happens. And as I said in our recent conversation, you know, the population is now open-minded people. The population is now demanding a lot. Then a lot of people have been asking this harm to recruit from this country of Burkina. And this is what happened now. They just have 1 month to leave the country, and we hope, nothing will happen because it's different. The case is different for Mali. What we are living now is just the retrievement of the military in our country, not the end of the partnership with France.
Okay, thank you very much, Mousbaou, for that. Dr. Kwaja, we did hear from Mousbaou, not a very pretty picture for the involvement of the French in Burkina Faso. He's passed, I mean, he didn't even give them a pass back. He said they've done nothing. So let's track back a bit and look at what France's mission was. How has France's military presence and involvement in Burkina Faso evolved over time, and what was the main focus of this troop deployment? In your own understanding, do you think they achieved the objectives of the mission there?
Very much. I think it's important to provide a background and context to what we are dealing with. The first is to the effect that French West Africa is in deep crisis, and this crisis can be situated within the context of the emergence of insurgent groups, as well as cases of the unconstitutional change of government that we saw in Guinea, and some of that happening in Burkina Faso in terms of the kind of public discontent we are seeing in that country. But before we look at Mali and Burkina Faso, we need to appreciate the situation in Chad, the Republic of Chad. We also need to look at how the situation in Guinea also culminated in the kind of the kind of regime change we saw in that country and the role of the international community. Unfortunately, while we look at the internal dynamics around the emergence of insurgent or rebel groups within French West African countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, Chad, and Niger, the externalization of this conflict is also very important, and that is where France comes in. But the first point is that there is a very strong and organic relationship between France and French West Africa. France has been a colonial master over time, and post-independence French West Africa is one in which relationships between France and these colonies has been intact when it comes to currency, economic relationship, security cooperation. And that is what is informing the deployment of French troops to Mali and Burkina Faso. And the question of whether or not they've been able to achieve their mandate is complex to the extent that the new government of Mali and the government of France do not see the situation from the same lens.
Now, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Kwaja. I guess they were deployed there to stop this jihadist threat. So what is complex about that? I mean, it seems like black and white. You've been deployed. Yes.
The jihadist threat we are talking about, it's not a threat that can be uprooted at a go with just one deployment, because jihadist threats, looking at their manifestations across the world, it's not a one-off thing. There are instances where, as you uproot one, others spring up, and it requires both kinetic and non-kinetic deployments in order to deal with them. And it is not something that is linked to one country. Mali might be an arena where you see them active, but they have their cells scattered around other countries within West Africa and beyond. And that is why cooperation beyond Mali and West Africa is very important. Let's not forget that Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb is still very active. The situation in Mali, the situation in Syria are part and parcel of the broader security challenges we are dealing with in Africa. Even in Nigeria, you have the bandits, you have remnants of Boko Haram in the northeast, they are succeeding. They have succeeded because of the support they are getting from other insurgent groups outside Nigeria. They constitute the major oxygen that keeps them alive. And the situation in Mali and Burkina Faso are not far-fetched from the examples I just provided. And my take is that we have missed the point at two levels. The first, we've not been able to take a second look at how we dealt with the situation in Liberia and Sierra Leone with ECOMOG, where Nigeria provided both the offensive and defensive capabilities to ensure that the rebels in Liberia were uprooted. That is one.
But Dr. Kwaja, you would agree with me that it was a different type,
as well as other countries need to look at.
But Dr. Kwaja, sorry to interrupt, you would agree with me that the ECOMOG mission in Sierra Leone and Liberia, they were facing a different type of enemy. It was more of a conventional type of warfare. This is a different ballgame altogether.
Yeah, and that's why I'm raising the point to the effect that we need to look at the lessons learned. If it was a conventional war, today we are dealing with unconventional wars. Unconventional wars still requires boots on the ground. They still require equipping the military. They still require stronger cooperation between the countries where these troops will be deployed and the countries that are deploying the troops. So there is nothing different in terms of that infrastructure for response.
So
the second layer is the role of the international community. What we are seeing today is the politicization of security interventions or military interventions to the extent that Russia is coming in, France is going out. What is that telling us? We are back to the issue of great power conflict, where Africa is becoming the battleground for that conflict. And that is an area that ECOWAS should not even allow us to go. Because the moment we do that, Burkina Faso and Mali will end up becoming Syria. Because Syria today is facing the kind of challenges it's facing because of great power conflict.
Okay.
Where each of the great power is coming in with its own military might, not necessarily to stop the conflict, but to demonstrate and show or assert their powers.
Thank you, Dr. Kwaja. I'd like to bring in Mousbaou in Burkina Faso at this point. Now, Mousbaou, we've heard from Dr. Kwaja. He says we can't just look at it in black and white, absolute terms. It's more complicated than that, and he gave us a background to this. Now, Mousbaou, how many French troops were deployed for this mission in Burkina Faso, and why have the almighty French military struggled to contain the jihadist militant threat, despite being one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world? That's why people went to the streets of Burkina Faso to protest that, look, you can't just be occupying space. What is the essence of your presence here? We're not getting results, please. And then he got to a head, and the Burkina government had to ask them to leave within a month. So in your own understanding, as somebody that is on the ground in Burkina Faso, why do you think the French mission was not successful?
Thank you so much. I think everything is clear. More than 400 soldiers have been deployed by France here in Burkina, and most of them have been living in Ouagadougou. And we could notice that the war is not in Ouagadougou, but outside Ouagadougou. And imagine you've been dealing with people over 60 years now, and nothing is changing. In fact, this agreement has been signed in 2018. And since 2018 until now, what has been changed? And as we said, they are one of the most powerful army in the world. And apart from that, what really happened as a result? In fact, we know the result. And as a result, nothing has been done so far. And it's quite shameful to have like a military power like France in our country, and nothing has been done. You see, this time around with the transition, people are now requiring more the population to be more engaged in this war. We now thinking that only the Burkinabe can solve the problem. How can we imagine that we have all those powers around us as partners, but nothing has been changed? Then we'll change the game. What is the game now? Is to have more equipment from those partners and then let the job with the Burkinabe, and then we'll continue with the job. Because if truly France was a helpful hand, we will have seen the change here in Burkina, but unfortunately it did not be the case.
Thank you, Mousbaou. Dr. Kwaja, to what extent will the withdrawal of French special forces from Burkina Faso result in a power vacuum that extremist groups can exploit to expand their influence in the country? You did talk about the externalization of the conflicts. We do know that Burkina Faso is seeking other partners in this war against extremism. They're seeking closer ties with Russia. So from looking at the security architecture of the Sahel and Burkina Faso, do you think there will be a vacuum left, or their presence wasn't even felt in the first place when they leave? What impact would it have on the security situation in Burkina Faso and the Sahel in general?
Insurgent groups for the French troops to leave. And this is because as France withdraws its troops from the Sahel, we have not seen any concrete, comprehensive, and proactive approach being adopted by governments of the Sahel. And by government, I'm talking about the G5 Sahel countries, to say this is our approach to responding to the vacuum created by French withdrawal. We saw that with the withdrawal of humanitarian support by France, the kind of humanitarian crisis that decision generated. If France is withdrawing and you don't have boots on the ground to fill in the gap created by the French, then you are ceding or handing over this region to the insurgent.
Yeah, but Dr. Kwaja, the Burkinabes are saying, look, the French, sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Kwaja, the Burkinabes, you did talk about a vacuum, but the Burkinabes are saying, look, they were not effective in the first place. So how do you talk of a vacuum when the French presence was not really felt?
We are yet to see any concrete Marshall Plan on the part of the government of Burkina Faso to see this.
Hello, Dr. Kwaja, are you there? Okay, I'd like to bring in Mousbaou at this point while we sort out Dr. Kwaja's connection. Now, Mousbaou, Dr. Kwaja suggested that, you know, the Burkinabe government has not come out with a plan, a comprehensive plan to deal with this jihadist threat, and that they will feel the presence of the exit of French special forces. My question to you is, how will the withdrawal of French special forces from Burkina Faso impact Burkinabe's military ability to combat terrorist groups and maintain security in the region? Because he seems to suggest that, look, these guys are leaving, the jihadis are going to be happy that a sophisticated world power will not be there to threaten them or destroy them. So what do you make of all of this? Are the French going to be missed?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. As I said so far, you know, it's now 60 years we have been dealing in partnership with France. And over 7 years now we have been facing terrorism. And if there were a helpful hand, I believe that with the position in the world, we will have been handled with terrorism in our country. And you see, we came up knowing that no one will help Burkina to go out of this situation. Only the Burkinabe can do the work. And that's why Burkina has recruited now more homeland defense volunteers to help the army doing the job. And according to the transition led by President Ibrahim Traore, all what we need is logistics. If we have good equipment, we have weapons, we have helicopters and so on, we're very sure we will handle this terrorism issue in our country.
Now, Mousbaou, before I go to Dr. Kwaja, staying with you, we've seen a growing anti-French influence sentiment, I beg your pardon, in not just in Burkina Faso, but also Mali. The ordinary people of this country seem to be fed up with France. And it got to a head just last week. There were protests, unprecedented protests against the presence of the French ambassador to Burkina Faso. And I tell you that just yesterday, when the French, when the Elysee Palace released a statement saying they recalled the French ambassador, Ambassador Luc Khalad, to Paris, and they've also acknowledged that they will pull out their troops in 1 month. So the question is, can you provide some information and reasoning behind Burkina Faso's request for the replacement of the ambassador, and how will this decision impact relations between Paris and Ouagadougou?
I think a lot won't happen because, exactly, the ambassador Luc Khalad has been called by the president Emmanuel Macron to ask more about this news, and then they come up saying then there is no problem. We call them when we need them. Then if we ask them to leave, there is no problem, they will leave. But the situation is quite different from the case of Mali, because we'll be continuing with them in other parts, like in economic domains and others domains. But as far as the military and the security domain is concerned, then we'll have to keep this relationship, which is not profitable from our country. In fact, we are investing a lot of money. We are losing a lot of money in this issue. Then it will be better for Burkina to stay in other domains apart from the military domain. Then where we have a problem is the population is more requiring France to live in all the domains. Like in agriculture, they have been helping Burkina a lot. In economic, general speaking, and they have been helping him. But now we can see that the situation is not clear. The population is willing to have France to leave the country in all the domains they have been helping the country. They want them to leave. And some of the population, some part of the population also is willing to have Russia as a partner. And then we believe so much that we don't, in fact, need a partner to replace France in our country. All what we need is logistics and equipment. Then if we have it, we believe so much that our soldiers and the Homeland Defense volunteers will do the job.
Thank you, Mousbaou. We'll definitely get to that Russian beat of the question, of course, in the second half of the program. But before we go on a break, I'd like to take Dr. Kwaja's, I would like to know his thoughts on this, because you did mention the G5 Sahel, Operation Saval, and other French involvements in the Sahel to help stop violent extremism. Now that the French have been given 30 days to pull out troops from Burkina Faso at the request of the Burkina government, how will this align with the overall strategy for countering terrorism in the Sahel region? Because it's been said that most of these troops that will be removed from Burkina Faso will be sent to Niger. So is this, knowing that the French won't have a footprint, and they don't have in Mali and Burkina Faso, these are huge countries geographically and very important strategic countries to countering terrorism. How would this impact or align with the overall strategy of France in countering terrorism in the Sahel region?
The situation in the Sahel, as it stands, calls for an urgent convening, and this convening should be at the instance of the United Nations office here in West Africa, the African Union, the Lake Chad Basin Commission, ECOWAS, the G5 Sahel, all need to be in one room, including the European Union, to design a common agenda for response post-France. Look at the implication for a Russian intervention or involvement in the security of West Africa. What will the security architecture look like? What is the interest of Russia? If we don't do that, we will just be replacing one European actor with another, but the agendas have not been really deconstructed. And this convening should be urgent because we are seeing an expansion of the security interests of Russia through the Wagner Group that is active in DR Congo, Mali, Ukraine, and Burkina Faso is one key area of target that we see. And there is a need for us to really look at how well to engage this process, rather than having a silos approach to the discussion on the Sahel, where ECOWAS is doing its thing, the African Union is doing its thing, and they all bring out resolutions where enforcement becomes a major challenge. And I think when you have a more comprehensive approach with clearly defined responsibilities, that is the best way to deal with this issue. And I'm back to my point that when ECOMOG was established at the instance of Nigeria, where ECOWAS agreed that this is the mandate for ECOMOG, it was very clear. The mission was very clear. The targets were known. The responsibility of each party to the conflict was known. Yes, we can adopt that methodology, but recognizing the fact that we are dealing with a warfare that is not conventional. Many of the tools we are talking about that will be deployed to these countries are currently being trained on the unconventional warfare. In Nigeria, we've seen that happen because Boko Haram emerged in that context. The first set of troops that were sent were confronted with a situation where the unconventional approach that Boko Haram deployed became a major challenge for them. And there was a change of strategy. We've seen successes here in Nigeria, and that success can really be replicated in Burkina Faso and Mali.
Okay, it's better, like you suggested, not to work in silos, but have a joint comprehensive plan to deal with this decisively. You're watching Secure the Continent on News Central Television, and we've been discussing the implication of the withdrawal of French troops in 30 days as mandated by the government of Burkina Faso. What are the implications for this for security in Burkina Faso and the Sahel in general? We'll continue our conversation after this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Secure the Continent on News Central Television. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining, we've been discussing the French withdrawal from Burkina Faso as demanded and requested by the government of Burkina Faso. What are the implications of this for security in Burkina Faso and the Sahel? And I still have with me Mousbaou, SHITTOU, a journalist who joins us live from Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and also Dr. Chris Kwaja, Associate Professor of International Relations at the Center for Peace and Security Studies in Adamawa State in northern Nigeria. Now, I'd like to start with you, Mousbaou. Dr. Kwaja did mention the Russian influence and presence. Now, there's a lot of pushbacks to Wagner's presence in Africa. French President Emmanuel Macron had strong words to condemn the presence of Wagner in Africa. There's talks about human rights abuses, etc. So the question is, how has Burkina Faso's government officially responded to the allegations of a deal with the Wagner Group, and what counter-arguments have been presented? If you do recall, at the US-Africa Summit, the Ghanaian President, Nana Akufo-Addo, did talk about, Burkina Faso's dealings with the mercenary group, the Wagner Group.
Well, thank you so much for this question. Well, I will start with the last sentence. Well, recently we have seen what happened with the President Nana Akufo-Addo at the UN summit. Then we have been really sad. Then with this news came up with the president, one of the ECOWAS members. Then, well, it's been a while. Those institutions have not been able to really be helpful with Burkina and Mali and all those countries facing with terrorism. The same thing with the G5 Sahel. Then, but going to the extent of talking about Burkina getting in touch with Wagner, really it has been a sad news. But fortunately for him, we have, with the opposition with the president. But come back on the situation. Well, the answer has been faithful. The government replied to this allegation. What the spokesman said. The spokesman of the government said, "Our Wagner is our soldiers and the homeland defense volunteers. Those people are our Wagner. We are now in a position that of having the population really to be more engaged in this war. This is a war, and all what we need is to have the population to be more engaged. We are not looking forward to having Wagner in our country. Officially, from what the president and the government said, we are not looking forward to have the Wagner in our country. All what we need from those partners is to give us more logistic, more equipment. We need to weapons to fight against terrorism. That's it. So they can be as they can be active. We're not going to arrive at that level. So they don't need to be afraid. But in fact, to say a little bit about what we have just said recently, he said, what did he say? He said, Russia has been now in every country's mouth. Those people also have the interest in Africa, and they're willing to have Africa, like France, China, and so on. Now, if we really need to base on those forces, all what we need is peace in our country. If they can help, they will help. But unfortunately, Burkina is not in this situation like the Mali has the case. The case is different from Mali. Then we want to arrive at this situation. All what we need is weapons and logistics.
Thank you, Mousbaou. Dr. Kwaja, there's been a lot of pushback when it comes to the Wagner Group's presence in Africa, and like you said, the externalization. It just speaks to the externalization of the conflict in Africa. Seems to be the new playground. So, what do you make of the Wagner Group and the allegations of human rights abuses? How would it fit into this strategy of getting rid of violent extremists in the Sahel? Because if you talk to people, if you look at the results, some will say, look, you might not like their methods, but they're getting results. You look at Central African Republic, for example, it depends on who you're asking. They'll tell you that the Wagner Group's presence there has delivered results. If you also look at neighboring Mali, they'll tell you that they're effective and getting results. So what's your take on this?
Beyond the results, what are the human rights implications or consequences of the activities of mercenaries, or to be specific, the Wagner Group in DR Congo? This is one area that even for us, I am a member of the United Nations Working Group on Mercenaries, and the working group is one key actor in DR Congo that we see, and we are monitoring. The situation in Mali is also one area that we are concerned about. Burkina Faso will be next in the context of the movement of the Wagner Group into Burkina Faso. The human rights abuse that is perpetrated, who is responsible, the whole question of culpability, the whole question of responsibility, the whole question of accountability and access to justice for victims of human rights abuses. These are specific issues that have not been adequately addressed in DR Congo. These are issues that might come up in Mali. We have not seen any concrete plan to deal with this issue. In the absence of a plan, then we need to really be concerned about the situation.
Now, Dr. Kwaja, I'm happy you mentioned the point of human rights, and it's extremely important that human rights are respected in the way, soldiers and these groups conduct themselves. But we see a lot of this human rights concerns coming from the West. It's the same West that had the Blackwater Group. They've been a catalogue of abuses of the operations of this U.S. company and its mercenaries in Afghanistan, in Iraq. We didn't hear the same concerns. And also the conventional troops of the United States of America. We remember Abu Ghraib in Iraq and their conduct in Afghanistan, not just American troops, the French, the British, and also France. So where is all this lecture of human rights coming from? Don't you sense a bit of hypocrisy in the way the West is hammering on human rights when it comes to this? And don't you think these countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, Central African Republic, as independent nations, have the agency to decide which security arrangement they want to go for, or who they want to partner with them in dealing with this problem of jihadist insurgents?
Burkina Faso were all members of the defunct Organization of African Unity. In 1977, when the OAU Convention on Mercenaries was launched, they were all members of the OAU. When the OAU transformed itself to the African Union, and the African Union developed the African Union policy on security sector reform in the continent, there is a specific provision in the SSR policy of the AU that says the African Union abhors the use of private military and security companies in the continent.
But executive outcomes got results in Sierra Leone.
To that document. So the point is, I am not saying don't get private military and security companies involved in whatever you want to do. But under what law and what are the safeguards for human rights? What are some of the key issues you've prioritized to ensure that a private military and security company that you are hiring, or in the event that the state is ceding what we call core state functions of providing security for its own population, if it's ceding that responsibility to a private sector, then there should be clarity about issues of protecting the rights of the citizens. It's not about the West, it's about Africans. That the West are raising it and Africans are quiet creates more concerns for us, because you have a situation where human rights abuses are happening and the victims themselves
Yeah, but the human rights abuses
do not have the
committed
voice,
committed by the
or
West.
their voices are being muzzled by the state.
Now, what would you say about the human rights? I mean, he who comes to judgment must come with clean hands. What would you say about the human rights abuses committed by the West in these countries that I mentioned? They haven't sought justice. I mean, they've been evading justice. They're not parties to the Rome Statute signature of the International Criminal Court. So, I mean, it's just what it is. But let me move on to Mousbaou now at this point. And if you want to react to the last point, please feel free to. How has the economic and social situation in Burkina Faso been affected by the violence and insecurity in the region, in the country? It's been said that about 40% of Burkina Faso territory is under the control of these extremist groups.
Yeah. Well, it affects really badly the economic and social domains of here in Burkina. But first of all, I would like to come back on to what Dr. Kwaja just said. You know, well, we are independent country. As far as Burkina is concerned, we are independent country. And I believe that they know what they're doing, and all those countries also who have been partnered with Russia and Wagner, they know what they're doing. All what they need is results. At a certain situation, you know, that you don't have anything to do. You know, they have been partners with France. It's been a while. Then what happened? No effective results. Then all what we need now is results. The population is really demanding a lot now, and which can push the government to do what they don't want to do, or to go and think deeply about what is really happening here in Burkina. And as I said, so far, we won't arrive at that situation of having a private military in our country. We won't arrive at a certain level where we'll be replacing France with another power, with another partner as far as military position is concerned. Then, all what we need from those people is result. And what would be result is logistic and weapon. Now, come back on what the question.
The impact,
40%
yes.
of the impact. 40% of the population has been taken by that terrorist groups. Then, well, economically, it is obvious that we are really suffering a lot with the move of the population from one area to another. And as you know, agriculture is really the domain where we have a lot of people dealing with. Then people are not being able to produce, to farm. And this really a shock for the population. Apart from that, you could notice even in other economic sectors, other not economic sectors, then a lot of people are not being able to work a lot. Then either with the NGOs and the population, well, it's really tough. It's really tough. As social also and humanitarian is concerned, you know, a lot has been done. We are now willing to have, even food for the population, and which is really quite tough for the population. And we hope with now having the population more engaged in financing some others domain like the humanitarian area could help having food for other people to live and still believe that the army and the homeland defense is wanted.
Thank you, Mousbaou. Dr. Kwaja, not a very pretty picture. Very dire situation there in Burkina Faso that Mousbaou just painted. Now, before we wrap things up, as we conclude this discussion, what steps, in your opinion, do you think the Burkinabe government should take to ensure the safety and security of its citizens in light of the withdrawal of French troops from its territory?
My sense is that the government of Burkina Faso and the people of Burkina Faso need help. They are in dire need of help. because about 65% of the land is no longer in control of the government. Where you have more than half of your land taken over by armed groups, you are totally not in charge. So it needs help, and it must define its need for help, not on the basis of countries that are also looking at where to flex their muscles, not to also allow Burkina Faso to be the Syria of Africa, where great power conflict will open up, but rather it should be proactive in looking at a more regional cooperative partnership that will allow ECOWAS, the G5 Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin Commission to sit together with the government of Burkina Faso and review the situation.
Okay. Sorry, we're fast to run out of time. I wish we had time to really dig into this, but we'll continue to monitor the situation in Burkina Faso. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Mousbaou, SHITTOU, who joined in from Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, and Dr. Chris Kwaja, Associate Professor of International Relations at the Center for Peace and Security Studies in Nigeria. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you both. I do appreciate your insight, your time, and contribution to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.